10 Things You Didn't Know George Harrison Did. George Harrison was not just a musician in his time, but a very famous one, and was also the lead guitarist of the most famous band in the world known as the Beatles, who rocked the world in the 90s. Although you might have heard somewhere how he was able to play more than 25 instruments, and several other facts about the young man who was dubbed the youngest among the Fab Four, this video will provide you with 10 other amazing things you probably didn't know George Harrison did in his lifetime. Number 1. George Harrison was a musical genius who never learned music but went on to master more than 25 instruments. Unlike Paul McCartney, who went to a music school, George Harrison never went to a music school to learn music. In fact, he doesn't know how to read music scores, but over his career and lifetime, he was able to master over 25 instruments, which includes the piano, violin, guitar, African tambos, xylophone, etc. He would later become the lead guitarist of the most famous music band in the world, the Beatles. Number 2. The other bandmates of the Beatles secretly watched him lose his virginity to a German dancer. You might not have even known, but George Harrison lost his virginity when he was 17 years old to a German dancer. At that period in his life, like most teenagers, he didn't really feel too conservative, but rather casual about sex, that it did not matter to him even if he did it in public. According to him, when he had sex for the first time, he did it with a German dancer in Hamburg, with Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and Pete Best all watching as he did it on his bunk bed. After he was done, they applauded him. Number 3. Harrison is often regarded as the inventor of the megastar rock benefit concert. Although before George Harrison came on board in 1971 with his concert for Bangladesh, there have been other performances for charity's sake, but when his friend, in the person of the great Indian sitar player Ravi Shankar, informed him of the suffering of Bangladesh refugees who were not just victims of war, but also a terrible and devastating cyclone, he felt compassion for them and decided to devote himself to the cause of giving hope to the hopeless refugees. He enlisted the help of his fellow superstars like Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Ringo Starr, Billy Preston, etc., with whom he played and sold out 2 fantastic shows at Madison Square Garden on August 1st, 1971. After the performance, he then made a compilation of the whole show and released it both as an album and a film. At the end of the whole saga, he successfully raised more than $12 million by 1985, and further profits from the movie sales and soundtrack continues to fund the George Harrison Fund for UNICEF. Number 4. There might actually be no Monty Python's Life of Brian without George Harrison. The original financial backer of Life of Brian, EMI Films, withdrew all of their funding and investments for the Monty Python comedy classic before the filming began due to the fear of inciting religious violence. They felt that the religious subject matter would raise a lot of controversy. But fortunately enough, George Harrison was a good friend and also a big fan of the Pythons, so to assist them, he set up his own production company, which was named Handmade Films, to fund the project. When he was asked why he took what seems like a crazy decision due to the possibility of a controversy hitting the movie, he replied that he liked the script and wanted to see the movie. Funny enough, he did not just see the movie, but also appeared as a character in it known as Mr. Papadopoulos, owner of the Mount. The movie, which was released in 1979, was a huge market success in both the UK and the US. It was later ranked as the 10th best comedy film of all time by The Guardian in 2010. Number 5. His inspiration for the first song he ever wrote was for people to get lost. It might sound so bizarre, but when he wrote his first solo composition, Don't Bother Me in the Palace Court Hotel in Bournemouth, England. He was sick in bed in that summer of 1963. He wrote the song just to exercise and check if he still had it in him to compose. Although he felt it wasn't a really good song, it showed him that despite his sickness, he could still write, and maybe he would eventually write something really good. The solo composition, Don't Bother Me, was featured on with the Beatles, which was their second studio album. Number 6. He wrote Crackerbox Palace about his quirky mansion. Another thing you probably did not know about George Harrison was that he nicknamed his 120-room Friar Park mansion Crackerbox Palace after a friend's description of Lord Buckley's tiny Los Angeles home. The Friar Park mansion was an amazing yet strange residential home with a grotto, a miniature Matterhorn, and a very luxurious garden which George Harrison loved tending to. The Victoria County History website described the house as an architectural fantasy in red brick, stone, and terracotta, mixing English, French, and Flemish motifs and lavish, undisciplined profusion. It was in the mansion that he penned his song, The Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, in tribute to the first owner of the mansion, Sir Frank Crisp. The song was then featured in his 1970 solo album titled All Things Must Pass. Number 7. He was the first Beatle to visit and play in the United States. The first time Americans came across the Beatles was their arrival at the newly renamed John F. Kennedy International Airport on February 7, 1964, as a seismic event in popular culture, but what they didn't know was that one of the Fabs had actually walked and dined among them in person of George Harrison. Harrison recalled in 1995's Beatles anthology documentary that I've been to America before, being the experienced Beatle that I was. He also went on further to say that he went to New York and St. Louis in 1963 to look around, and also to the countryside in Illinois where his sister was living at the time. Number 8. He was the first Beatle to meet a U.S. president. The goal of the Dark Horse Tour, held in 1974, was to give Harrison the chance to play tracks from his latest album and spread the gospel of his beloved Indian music. It was the first North American tour by any Beatles since 1966. The excitement for the tour was greatly reduced by a widespread nostalgic feeling for what used to be known as the Beatles. But there was George Harrison with his blunt refusal at conforming to the past, claiming that the band wasn't that good and flatly refusing to ever associate with his fellow Beatle, Paul McCartney. But despite the abuses and criticism that came with the tour, 22-year-old Jack Ford, son of newly inaugurated President Gerald Ford, thoroughly enjoyed the show. He caught wind of the November 16th concert in Salt Lake City and used his influence to get backstage and meet the headliners. From there, he invited Harrison and his band to visit the White House, an opportunity they took on the 13th of December by visiting the renowned White House. After a quick tour of the executive mansion led by Jack's sister Susan Ford, they waited in the cabinet room to meet with the president himself. And soon, he and his band were ushered into the Oval Office for their not-so-formal meeting with President Ford, where Harrison and the president spoke for close to 20 minutes, reportedly touching on John Lennon's deportation drama, which had been largely orchestrated by Ford's predecessor, Richard Nixon. Number 9. He was deeply fascinated with Formula One racing and owned a $1 million car. George Harrison was an individual who was not just passionate about his music, but also about fast vehicles. And according to him, he was just 12 years old when he saw Liverpool's first British Grand Prix in Aintree. From then on, he followed Formula One until the time he started his professional career as a musician. He also had in his possession numerous fast and powerful cars which were dated to the time he started earning big from the Beatles' profits. Some of the vehicles, including a Jaguar XKE Ferrari 365 GTC and an Aston Martin DB4. Although he had his driver's license revoked for the second time on February 28, 1972, after he crashed his Mercedes into a lamppost at 90 miles an hour, sending his wife Patty Boyd flying into the windshield. This wasn't enough to deter him from the fast lane. By the end of the 70s, he made friends with Jackie Stewart, the retired triple world champion Formula One driver. He would later pay tribute to Stewart and the entire F1 crew with his 1979 song, Faster. The proceeds went to support the cancer charity of the late Swedish driver Gunnar Nilsson, who succumbed to the disease a year earlier. In the year 1994, George Harrison became one of 100 people to order a McLaren F1 road car. Once clocked at reaching 231 miles an hour, the vehicle retailed for an upwards of £640,000 or $984,000. So George Harrison bought multiple expensive cars after earning big money from the Beatles. If you had the money to buy your dream car, what would you buy? Let us know in the comment section below. Number 10, he named the band the Traveling Wilburys after a mistake in the studio. Another thing that you didn't know George Harrison did was that he mistakenly came up with the name for the group he worked with after the Beatles saga. The Traveling Wilburys, while he was working on 1987's Cloud 9 with Jeff Lynne as co-producer. When he confronted with recording errors caused by faulty equipment, he would assure Lynne that we'll bury him in the mix. That single line sentence would eventually be shortened to Wilbury, a catch-all descriptor for minor performances, mistakes, and imperfections. He would then use that same slang in the spring of 1988 during a laid-back session with some friends in Los Angeles, where he was saddled with the responsibility of writing a B-side to a European 12-inch single. So he called Jeff Lynne, who was busy producing a new album for Roy Orbison. It was during dinner time that the three of them worked on the one piece together, and George Harrison made a suggestion that they go to Bob Dylan's house in Malibu, which is known for having a home studio in the garage, to strategize. After they were able to cook up something, they brought it before the producers. So what are your thoughts on today's video? Please let us know in the comment section below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of our incredible videos posted in the future. Keep an eye out for the next video. Bye for now.